Pascal's wager is one of the dumbest religious arguments ever. It's not really even an argument, it's just a whole bunch of ridiculous claims. Granted, that's not saying a lot because they're all dumb, but this is the most obviously bullshit that they can come up with, and while most of them don't bother with it at all, some do. The really dumb ones do. And who is that going to be? Yeah, take a guess, and let's get started. This time out, we've got a Matt Fradd video on Pascal's wager. How anyone in their right mind can take any of this crap seriously is beyond me, but there you go. I mean, really, what is wrong with these mental midgets that they can't even think rationally about their own arguments? Oh right, they're religious. I forgot. That kind of explains it all, doesn't it? But it proves just how ridiculous these imbeciles are and why we should all be pointing and laughing. Shame these fuckers. It probably won't help, but it will be fun, won't it? So let's get to it.
G'day, my name is Matt Fradd, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about Pascal's wager.
Because that's the dumbest apologetic argument ever, and you're just going to make a complete fool of yourself. Granted, that's not a massive surprise either because, Matt Fradd, he's kind of a dipshit if you've ever watched any of his content, and granted, I wasn't really expecting him to be in this video since it's not on his channel, but as we all know, religious apologetics is full of people stuffing other people's contents on their own channels in hopes of making a buck. This channel, Ascension Presents, is a pro-Catholic channel, and since Matt's a Catholic, I guess that makes sense. So, whatever. None of this really matters. I guess we should just get back and watch Matt make a complete fool of himself, because what the hell else is new, right?
This is an argument for belief in God that's very controversial, and there's a lot of YouTube videos and articles out there online saying that it's bunk, that it doesn't work.
Because it doesn't. It is absolute nonsense that starts with a false dichotomy and then gets worse from there. Granted, I don't want to rip it apart quite yet. I want Matt to get there first before I expose him for the complete fraud and irrational idiot that he is, but he's already shooting himself in the foot. This is controversial for a reason. Actually, I'd say laughable, but we can be charitable for the moment and use his terminology. Yet, if you really stop to think about it, it really isn't much worse than any other Christian apologetic argument, because they're all terrible. Maybe we'll talk about some of that coming up, because I've got no idea where any of this is going. It's just clear that the religious don't understand just how badly this fails, but that's because they're stupid.
I think they're wrong. So today in this video, I just want to share the bare bone basics of what Pascal's wager is. And then I want to look at some of your objections or some of the objections that you've heard in the comment section. And then in another video, I will respond as best as I can to those objections.
I don't know if it's worthwhile to go find that video or not. I guess that depends on just how badly he does here, which I think, based on my experience with Matt Fradd, is going to be pretty bad. However, I guess we can only do what we can do with the material that we've been given, and if you think I should go do that next video after having watched his performance here, of course, let me know down in the comments and I'll think about it. That's about all I can promise. These things should be well considered after all, but I guess if we did that, then we'd have to stop doing religious videos at all because they're all dumb, aren't they? But let's give him the benefit of the doubt for the moment and see if he can defend Pascal's wager. I'm willing to bet the farm that he can't, but hey, what do I know, right? Anyway, let's get back to it.
So who was Pascal? Pascal lived during the 17th century in France. He was an agnostic. He became a Christian. He fell into the heresy of Jansenism.
Of course, it's a heresy because you don't currently like it. That's how this always works, right? But one thing that the religious never bring up, and I'll be surprised if Matt mentions it, is that Pascal himself was mentally ill. Now, we don't know what was actually wrong with him. It was possibly multiple things, but he got gradually worse as he got older, with symptoms like headaches, peripheral neuropathy, epilepsy, and various neuropsychiatric disorders. He also got more religious as he got older. Connection? Who knows? We have letters to friends and biographies made by his sisters and granddaughters that describe his increasingly erratic behavior, such as hysteria, increased melancholy, and post-traumatic neurosis. We do know that he had a carriage accident which resulted in a subdural hematoma, which also contributed to his increasingly unstable beliefs. So Pascal is probably not somebody that you want to rely on, especially later in his life. So why is Matt doing so? Because it gets him where he wants to go, of course, and that's all these people ever care about.
Later on in his life, after a spiritual experience, he started to become, by and large, a faithful Catholic. And Pascal was working on a book on Christian apologetics. That just basically means a book that defends the faith or makes a positive case for the Christian faith.
While having a lot of mental problems at the same time. Is there a connection? I don't think that we'll ever know. We certainly can't discount it because it was clear that the older he got, and remember, Pascal died at 39, but the older that he got, the worse that he got. And after his death, he had an autopsy, and it was discovered that he had some pretty severe internal problems, which some have attributed to celiac disease, but he also had distinct damage to his brain. Most of his real work was done early while he was in at least better health. It was only after his mental faculties had started to dramatically fail that he became fanatically religious. Like I said, we're never going to know what actually happened, but this is sufficient reason to question the validity of his later life delusions.
Unfortunately, Pascal died before he could publish the book, so his friends collected all of his notebooks, basically put it together and published that. So you can get that book today. It's called The Pensées. It's super great if you've got ADD or something similar like me, because you're just reading these basically thick tweets, as it were, from Pascal on his different thoughts on the Christian faith.
And why does it not surprise me that Matt's got something wrong with him too? And I've read the book, although certainly not for a very long time, and it's mostly incoherent. Granted, a lot of that might come from the fact that it was just compiled from his notes after his death, but the ideas just drift around with no rhyme or reason, and there's been a significant amount of work, and numerous books written, just trying to give some kind of meaning to the mess that Pascal wrote, or ideas he came up with since he didn't actually write the book. Why? Because a lot of people, especially Catholics, seem to think that it has to mean something, and it's not just the ramblings of a madman. But really, none of this much matters to the supposed content of this video, so let's try to get to that, shall we? Because this is really getting us nowhere.
One of the things that Pascal is most famous for is his wager. So what is that? Well, Pascal basically makes this argument. Either God exists or God does not exist.
And one of the primary failures of the wager is that it only considers one very specific God. So either the Christian God is real or no gods are real. And that's just laughable. So laughable, in fact, that lots of religions use Pascal's wager as an irrational appeal to their own gods because it can easily be used to defend pretty much anything. Hell, it doesn't even have to be a god at all. Either gray aliens exist, and only gray aliens, or no aliens exist. That doesn't mean anything. This is why the wager ultimately fails, because it doesn't actually get you anywhere. The second you introduce the potential existence of multiple pantheons of gods, or anything else really, then the whole thing collapses into a gigantic pile of bullshit. This is really why the religious don't use the wager much anymore, because most people know how to defeat it. And it can be defeated ridiculously easily, and they don't like that. That's why it's only spoken of within religious circles, at least if they've got a brain, because outside of that, it just gets laughed at. But sure, Matt, keep going. Anything you say is going to damage your case, and that's just fine with me.
We have two responses, right, that we can possibly have towards God. We can believe, or we can be in a state of unbelief.
I mean, that's just a false dichotomy right there. I can also say, I don't know. I can say, I don't care. Or the question that really needs to be asked, what God do you mean, and why that one? Because that gets the religious in an uproar, and it's kind of funny to watch. I just really like that one. Yeah, but that's laughable at best and stupid at worst, and they really have nothing else that they can say. Remember, you have to apply this to any god, including one that you just make up in your head, because it doesn't actually get you anywhere rationally. This is what happens when you're running on pure fifis and faith. You make yourself look like an idiot every single time, because you are.
There are no other options here, you understand. There's belief and unbelief, that's it. If I don't believe, then whatever else I do is going to be unbelief. And so for this reason, Pascal says this is a forced wager. You have to make a bet.
No, you don't. Because there are other options that he's just ignoring on purpose, because the second that you acknowledge them, the whole thing falls apart. The wager just smuggles in his particular theology, and that betrays their inherent biases. That's why this doesn't get you anywhere, and most theists, except the real lunatics, they avoid this thing like the plague.
Because refraining from betting is itself a bet, because it is itself unbelief. So what are you going to do?
This fails because belief is not a choice. You can't control what you believe in. Belief is what you are convinced of, and being convinced is not beholden to the will. You are either convinced or you're not. You can't just make yourself convinced of anything. If you think that you can, then by all means, jump out of an airplane without a parachute and convince yourself that gravity isn't real on the way down. Now, granted, that doesn't matter, because no matter what you are convinced of, there is an external reality out there that doesn't care about your beliefs. You are going to go splat no matter what, because gravity is in fact real, regardless of what you believe. In the same way, there either is a God or there isn't, and it doesn't matter what you believe in, a God is either there or it's not. So the whole wager is just laughably pointless no matter what you do. Now, this is going to come back to bite him in the ass, but I'm going to wait until he gets there, because the only logical proposition to this isn't what he wants it to be. But hey, let's give him some more rope to hang himself with, because I think that'll be fun.
Well, Pascal wasn't a big fan of metaphysical arguments for the existence of God, such like we find in Thomas Aquinas.
Because those are crap too. All arguments for gods are. These exist only to comfort the believer, to make them think that they've got some remotely rational reason to believe, when in fact they don't. Because we all know they're not talking to us. They're only talking to each other and trying to stroke their own egos. Every single argument is just fallacious because they are desperate to believe. But people who don't believe, they're not looking for reasons to believe, are they? We are looking for evidence, and the religious simply don't have any. That's why every single one of these stupid arguments for God fail as miserably as they do. Because the believers are really, really dumb.
Why? Well, he thought most people don't understand them, and even those who do understand them, later on, when they're not thinking about them, wonder if they've made a mistake or not.
Because every single argument is terrible. Because you need to overlook ridiculously obvious problems in order to maintain belief. Remember, that's all they're doing. They are chasing after their imaginary friends because they really want them to be there. but they've got no good reason to take any of it seriously, so they cling to bad reasons because we just really want it to be true. This is why the religious are so irrational. They are after a conclusion that cannot be evidentially supported just because it makes them feel good. What a bunch of morons! But that's kind of the problem, isn't it?
So suppose you or a friend is thinking to themselves, I've looked at the arguments for atheism and I've looked at the arguments for Christian theism, and I just can't tell which one is stronger.
Except there are no arguments for atheism because atheism isn't a positive claim. And of course, he's only concerned with Christianity here because that's where he really wants to end up. Of course, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of gods that man has invented for himself to bow down to, and if you want to get to the right one, if there are any right ones, then you have to consider them all. Hell, you have to consider gods that man has no concept of, because those just might be right too. This is where they demonstrate that they just don't care about reality. They're only after the stuff that already appeals to them on an emotional level. It should not be this difficult for them to figure it out, but they don't really care, do they? And that's a problem.
If you're like that, or if you have a friend like that, this is where Pascal's wager comes in handy.
No, it doesn't, because Pascal's wager is downright stupid. This is where we see that they don't care about the truth at all. If you care about the truth, then all of the problems that I've already pointed out make the wager utterly pointless. This is why Matt is such a fucking moron. You don't get to truth through comfort. You don't get to truth by picking a side without evidence. In fact, you can't believe one thing over another because you really want to regardless, so the whole thing is a complete waste of time. This just proves how ignorant the religious really are. Not that they care, because they're just after emotional comfort, and that is pathetically childish.
Because it isn't an argument for the existence of God, it's an argument for why you should believe in God if reason can't decide.
If reason can't decide, then you shouldn't believe anything. You should say, I don't know, and keep looking for evidence. But that's not what they're after, is it? They just desperately want everyone to be just like they are because that's emotionally comforting. If they can't convince you to adopt a belief through faith, then they will just lie to you and say, well, you should just believe anyhow, just in case. But that's still dumb. If reason can't decide, and seriously, they would know reason if it bit them in the ass, then they shouldn't believe anything at all. Because that's what atheism is. It's not believing at all. But they don't want that, do they? Because they're dumb.
Right? If reason can't decide, then we can decide based on other factors, such as self-interest.
And don't you think that if a real God actually existed, they couldn't just see straight through that shit? What kind of fucking pathetic God couldn't tell if you were just playing an odds game? Are you fucking dumb? Wait, don't answer that because we already know the answer. Because this kind of shit is just stupid. It shows just how little these people actually think about their gods. Or just how little they actually think at all. This is a bald rationalization to get them to where they desperately want to go, nothing more. This is why the religious are so laughable, because clearly they haven't put one moment's thought into any of this, because, well, they just don't care. They just want to believe, and that is fucking stupid.
So, what do we get if we bet on God? What do we lose if we bet on God and he doesn't exist?
You don't understand anything. Nothing at all. You haven't read your own book, and you don't understand your own theology. This is pretty typical from the religious, though, isn't it? I mean, seriously, I was just going to do this as one video. It would be a bit long, but hey, one and done, right? But now, just because it's such a slog to get through this guy's stupidity, I'm going to have to break it up because my eyes are rolling into the back of my head at his stupidity. This is the problem with the religious. It really is. How can they be this dumb? And the answer is they don't care. This is not about coming to a rational, evidence-based, intelligent conclusion to the question. It's about, I just really want to believe, and fuck giving it any rational thought. This is your typical theist, and that is utterly pathetic. If you are religious and you look at people like Matt Fradd and you roll your eyes, yeah, that's how we look at your beliefs too, because none of it is any better than this. This is a lot easier to see than some, but all religious belief is effectively this. I really want it to be true, so I'll just lie to myself and others so that I can get an emotional hard-on. Well, fuck you. You are just embarrassing yourself, and it's time we stop patting these imbeciles on the head and telling them to go play in traffic. Enough is enough. Call a spade a spade. These people are morons and they need to be treated that way. They need to be called out in public. They deserve no respect whatsoever. It's not going to matter to a lot of them, but so what? I'm done playing nice with the terminally deluded. I guess I never really did, but you get my meaning. Tell the truth and only the truth. These people are an embarrassment to humanity. Go rent a clue and get better because you deserve no respect otherwise. So we'll be back next week with the end of this, and I'll save the really savage ripping apart of Pascal's wager until then. Not that Matt will care, because he's an idiot, and so is anyone who believes in any of this. So anyway, I'm going to go lie down because suddenly I've got a splitting headache. How about you?